There's a fundamental concern that in the absence of national reconciliation, in the absence of the political reforms that have to be made, you're not going to be able to stabilize the country. You can put 200,000 troops in there, and you won't stabilize it unless the political reforms are put in place. You can have some temporary benefit. You put troops in any situation, you're going to get some temporary benefit. But we will not be able to hold on to that in the long run without having some kind of political reform and political stability developed in Iraq. One general made very clear that without political progress, all the troops in the world will not provide security. So, the other concern was that when you add more troops, it basically decreases the willingness of the Iraqis to do what they're supposed to do. So that we, in fact, are basically playing the role that they ought to be playing in terms of combat. So it's a disincentive to the Iraqis. The message you have to send to the Iraqis is that there is no open commitment here. We are going to draw the lines. We're going to gradually reduce our combat forces. We'll give you all the help possible to get your people trained to do the job, but damn it, this is your country and you have to do the job. That's got to be the message. And secondly, it is also about unifying this country, for God's sakes. I mean, I told the President when we presented this report, Mr. President, no president can conduct a war with a divided country and with a divided Congress. You can't. You may think you can, but you can't. And ultimately, for us to bring this country together and heal some of the wounds that have taken place, we have got to be able to unify this country behind some kind of common strategy. Well, you know the President's decision. It's to basically ignore the recommendations that we made and to move ahead with a surge of about 21,000 troops. It'll probably be more than that if you bring the support element to it. I think it's the wrong message to send to the Iraqis for all the reasons that I said. And more importantly, it will continue to divide this country. What he's in for is a long period of confrontation now with the Congress on almost every decision that's going to be made. And frankly, we don't need it. We don't need that kind of constant confrontation to continue. What's going to happen? Now, let me conclude with this. I think the surge is going to take place. It's very hard to stop the surge. I mean, most of these troops are on the way right now. There'll be a temporary benefit, but absent any political reform, absent the ability of the Iraqi army to hold these areas, it will not succeed. We've already learned that lesson. If the violence continues, then it's likely Congress will continue to assert itself on oversight hearings, on passage of resolutions. I think they will pass a resolution, non-binding, that will criticize the surge. And I think ultimately, if that fails and the violence continues over these next few months, I think they are going to move to focus on the power of the purse. Congresses have done that in the past, in Vietnam, in Lebanon, in Somalia, in Rwanda, and in Bosnia. And I suspect that will take place. That they'll either condition the money in some way or take further steps with regards to the funding. It's possible that the President might revise his policy, but I wouldn't bet on it. When you listen to the President, particularly the Vice President, they are in another world in terms of recognizing the realities of Vietnam. The likelihood is that, as I said, this will not work. There will be some revisions in policy either by the Congress or the President. But I think the bottom line is that this war is going to pass on to the next President. That's really the reality. I don't see it being in any way resolved between now and the next election. And whoever the next president is, like Jerry Ford, that president will have to do what others failed to do. Whether this or any president is willing to recognize the realities of war, to be committed to the goals of our preamble, to exercise some common sense for the common good, and to exercise some leadership. That will determine the ethical and historical legacy of that president. And in many ways, and more importantly, it will determine how this country faces the challenge of Iraq.
General, do you have a comment on that?
No, just a comment, Senator, on the fact that in the pre-surge period, which many of us remember, it was very common for state-sponsored militias out of the security ministries to be conducting these kind of attacks against those religious groups that didn't agree with their particular faith. We haven't seen anything like that since the surge, meaning the security ministries have become responsible agents of government. And so not discounting the continued pressure on small religious communities, at least there's no evidence that it will be state-sponsored, and that's a significant change.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator McCain.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since you brought up, regrettably, General Dempsey 2003 and 2004, the fact is that you did not support the surge and said that it would fail. Secretary Panetta was part of the Iraq study group that recommended withdrawals from Iraq and opposed the surge.
What's going to happen? Now, let me conclude with this. I think the surge is going to take place. It's very hard to stop the surge. I mean, if most of these troops are on the way right now. It will not succeed.
Since you brought up, regrettably, General Dempsey 2003 and 2004, the fact is that you did not support the surge and said that it would fail. Secretary Panetta was part of the Iraq study group that recommended withdrawals from Iraq and opposed the surge. So we're all responsible for the judgments that we make, and obviously that affects the credibility of the judgments that we make now on Iraq. I regret that you had to bring that up, General Dempsey. The fact is that there are some of us who were over there in those years you talked about. In fact, maybe even had other members of their family over there and saw that it was failing and that we needed to have the surge, and the surge succeeded. And the fact is that we could have given sovereign immunity, as we have in other countries, to keep our troops there and give them the immunity that they needed. We have other agreements with other countries that guarantee sovereign immunity. The fact is that every military leader recommended that we have residual forces at minimum of 10,000 and usually around 20,000. That was the recommendations made before this committee by General Odierno, recommendations made by General Petraeus, recommendations made by even lower-ranking military who had spent, as you mentioned, a great deal of time there and did not want to see that service and sacrifice all wasted away because of our inability and lack of desire to reach an agreement with the Iraqis. As I said in my opening statement, the Iraqis are largely responsible as well. But the fact is that when Senator Lieberman, Senator Graham and I were there, the Iraqis were ready to deal. And what was the administration's response? They didn't have a number and missions last May as to our residual force in Iraq. So as things happened in that country, things fell apart.
Thank you for raising the question. What should the United States do with Leon Panetta? I had in the Monterey Herald there were a couple letters that said that I should run for president, and then I had there was another letter to the editor that was written just a couple of weeks ago, and it said, Leon Panetta is absolutely he would be very worthy because of his experience to be president of the United States, but he has the intellectual capacity and judgment not to want to seek that office. Essentially, I'm too smart to run for president.